In the winter of 1873, the German immigrant community of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, whispered about 11-year-old Emma Richter in hushed, fearful tones. This pale, quiet child could calculate the day of the week for any date in human history within seconds. Memorize entire conversations word for word after hearing them just once, and recite the precise number of steps between any two buildings in her neighborhood. What modern science might recognize as an extraordinary neurological condition was to the people of 1873 either a divine blessing or something far more sinister. But when Emma began using her remarkable abilities to reveal buried secrets, predict deadly accidents, and recite intimate details of crimes that supposedly no living person had witnessed, the community's amazement turned to terror. By spring, 3 men would be dead. A family would flee in the night, and Emma Richter herself would vanish without a trace, leaving behind only a leather journal filled with numbers that no one dared to decode. What the residents of Brewery Town didn't realize was that Emma's gift would expose a web of lies, betrayal, and murder that had been carefully hidden for nearly a decade, and that her mathematical precision would become their community's most terrifying nightmare. Milwaukee's German Quarter in 1873 was a bustling enclave of red brick breweries, modest wooden homes, and the constant sound of German voices mixing with English in the crisp Wisconsin air. The community of nearly 8,000 German immigrants had built their own little Bavaria along the shores of Lake Michigan, complete with beer gardens, traditional bakeries, and the familiar rhythms of old-world life transplanted to American soil. The men worked in the breweries, Schlitz, Best, and the dozens of smaller operations that made Milwaukee famous, while their wives tended gardens that yielded the same vegetables their grandmothers had grown in the Rhineland. Heinrich and Greta Richter had arrived from Bavaria in 1861 with dreams of prosperity and their infant daughter, Emma. Heinrich found steady work as a brewmaster at the Kellner Brewery, a mid-sized operation that supplied beer to the growing city's thirsty population. Greta took in laundry and mending to supplement their income, her nimble fingers working by candlelight, long after Emma had been put to bed in their small but tidy home on Galena Street. The Richters were unremarkable in every way except for their daughter. Emma had been born during the harsh Atlantic crossing, 3 weeks premature, and so small that the ship's doctor doubted she would survive the journey. But survive she did, though she remained slight and pale with enormous gray eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with unsettling intensity. As a toddler, she rarely cried or demanded attention, content to sit quietly in corners, watching and listening as the adult world unfolded around her. By age 4, Emma's parents began to notice something unusual. She could recite entire conversations she had overheard days earlier, complete with the precise inflections and accents of the speakers. She counted everything: the number of stitches in her mother's embroidery, the steps from their front door to the bakery, the exact time between the brewery whistles that marked the beginning and end of each workday. When Heinrich taught her basic arithmetic, she absorbed mathematical concepts with frightening speed, solving problems in her head faster than he could work them out on paper. The German community initially viewed Emma's abilities with a mixture of pride and unease. Old Mrs. Brennan, who claimed to remember the witch trials in her grandmother's stories, crossed herself whenever Emma's calculating gray eyes fixed on her. But Father Koller, the stout Bavarian priest who served their small Catholic parish, declared Emma's gifts to be a blessing from God, a child chosen to demonstrate divine wisdom in their New World community. The winter of the previous year had been particularly harsh, with temperatures dropping so low that Lake Michigan froze solid for the first time in a generation. The brewery workers huddled around coal stoves, their breath visible even indoors, while their wives struggled to keep their families warm and fed through the long, bitter months. It was during this isolated winter that Emma's abilities began to take on a darker character. Though no one yet understood what was coming, Emma had developed the habit of sitting by the small window in their kitchen, watching the neighbors go about their daily routines with the same intense focus she applied to mathematical problems. She began to notice patterns not just in numbers but in human behavior. Mr. Kruger always walked to the brewery by the same route, taking exactly 247 steps, except on Wednesdays when he took a different path that required 284 steps. Mrs. Fisher hung her laundry in a specific sequence, but when her husband worked late at the mill, she changed the order completely. These observations might have been dismissed as the quirks of an unusual child, except that Emma began to vocalize her findings in ways that made the adults increasingly uncomfortable. The transformation from curiosity to dread began on a gray February morning. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, methodically eating her breakfast while her mother prepared her father's lunch pail, when she suddenly looked up and announced, "Mr. Dietrich will not come home from the brewery today. He will die at exactly 14 minutes past 2 hours." Greta nearly dropped the tin pail she was holding. "Emma, mein Gott, what a terrible thing to say. Why would you think such a thing?" Emma's gray eyes remained fixed on her mother's face with that unsettling intensity. "He has been drinking from the small brown bottle for 17 days. Yesterday he drank 3 times more than usual. His steps were uneven, 251 instead of his normal 244. When people change their patterns by more than 10%, something significant happens within 72 hours. Mr. Dietrich's pattern changed by 12%. The calculation is simple." Hinrich, who had been putting on his heavy wool coat, stopped and stared at his daughter. Johann Dietrich was indeed a drinker, but no more than half the men in the German quarter. The idea that Emma had been counting his steps and tracking his drinking habits was disturbing enough. But her calm mathematical certainty about his death sent a chill through both parents that had nothing to do with the Wisconsin winter. "You must not say such things, Emma," Hinrich said firmly. "It's not proper for a child to speak of death." Emma simply nodded and returned to her breakfast, but her parents exchanged worried glances over her bent head. They had grown accustomed to their daughter's unusual observations, but this felt different, darker, and more specific than her typical mathematical pronouncements. Later that day, Jan Dietrich collapsed in the brewery's malt room. The official cause of death was heart failure, brought on by what Dr. Mayer determined to be chronic alcohol poisoning. The brewery workers who found him noted that he had been acting strangely for weeks, drinking more heavily than usual and showing signs of severe anxiety. But what truly unsettled them was the timing. Emma Richter's prediction had been accurate to the minute. Word of Emma's grim prophecy spread through the German quarter like smoke from a chimney fire. Some dismissed it as coincidence, but others remembered the pale girl with the calculating eyes and began to wonder what else she might have observed during her silent vigils at the kitchen window. The Richter family found themselves the subject of whispered conversations and sideways glances when they walked to church or visited the market. Father Koller, who had previously praised Emma's gifts as divine, now seemed less certain. When Hinrich approached him after Sunday Mass, seeking guidance about his daughter's disturbing prediction, the priest's jovial demeanor had been replaced by something approaching concern. "Heinrich, my friend," Father Koller said, his Bavarian accent thick with worry. "Perhaps it would be best if young Emma spent less time watching the neighbors and more time with her prayers. The Lord gives us gifts, yes, but sometimes the devil can twist even the most innocent abilities toward darker purposes." This suggestion troubled Hinrich deeply. He had always been a practical man, more concerned with the science of brewing than the mysteries of faith. But even he could not dismiss the unsettling accuracy of Emma's prediction. That evening, he sat his daughter down for a serious conversation. "Emma, you must tell me the truth. How did you know about Mr. Dietrich?" Emma looked at her father with those enormous gray eyes. Her expression as calm and analytical as always. "I watch, I count, I remember. Mr. Dietrich's behavior changed in predictable ways. When someone increases their alcohol consumption by 37% over a 17-day period, while simultaneously reducing their food intake by approximately 20%, cardiac stress becomes inevitable. I calculated the most probable time of failure based on his age, weight, and observed symptoms." Hinrich felt his blood run cold. His 11-year-old daughter was speaking like a physician or something far more troubling. "But Emma, how could you know all these details about Mr. Dietrich eating and drinking?" he asked, his voice tight with unease. "I observe everything, Papa. Every day, every person, every pattern." Emma's voice remained matter-of-fact. but there was something in her eyes that made Henrik deeply uncomfortable. "Would you like me to tell you about the other calculations I've made?" she asked, calm as ever. Henrik quickly shook his head. He did not want to know what else his daughter had calculated about their neighbors' lives and deaths. But as he tucked Emma into bed that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that his family was standing at the edge of something much darker than a simple mathematical curiosity. The February snow continued to fall outside their small house, muffling the sounds of the German Quarter and creating an insulated world where secrets could be hidden and observations could be made without detection. Emma lay quietly in her narrow bed, her mathematical mind processing the day's data and calculating probabilities that no 11-year-old should be able to comprehend, and certainly no 11-year-old should want to know. In the weeks following Jan Dietrich's death, the atmosphere in Milwaukee's German Quarter shifted like the wind off Lake Michigan. Emma continued her daily observations, but now her parents watched her with growing unease as she sat by the kitchen window, her gray eyes tracking the movements of their neighbors with mechanical precision. The child who had once been their pride had become a source of deep, knowing worry. The brewing community was tight-knit by necessity. The men relied on each other for work, their wives for companionship during the long winters, and their children played together in the narrow streets between the red brick buildings. But Emma had never quite fit into this social fabric. While other children played games and told stories, she preferred to sit alone, counting and calculating and watching the world around her with that unsettling intensity. Greta began to notice that Emma's observations were becoming more detailed and more disturbing. The child would mention casually that Mrs. Weber had been meeting secretly with Mr. Kellner behind the brewery on Tuesday afternoons for 6 weeks, or that the Schneider family had been burying something in their back garden every Sunday after church. When Greta asked how Emma could possibly know such things, the girl would simply explain that she had observed the patterns and calculated the probabilities. "People think they are being secret," Emma said one March morning as she methodically buttered her bread, "but they follow patterns just like numbers." Mrs. Weber always told her husband she was visiting her sister on Tuesday afternoons, but she took 127 steps to Mr. Kellner's house instead of 349 steps to her sister's. The Schneiders buried objects wrapped in cloth, exactly 73 centimeters apart in a grid pattern. "They believe no one is watching," Emma added, "but I am always watching." Henrik had heard enough. That evening, after Emma was asleep, he spoke seriously with his wife about their daughter's increasingly troubling behavior. "Greta, this cannot continue. Emma is becoming unnatural. Children should not observe such things, and they certainly should not speak of them so coldly." Greta nodded, her hands trembling as she mended one of Henrik's work shirts. "I'm frightened," she whispered. "Not of Emma, but of what people will think. Already the neighbors look at us strangely. Mrs. Brennan crossed the street yesterday when she saw me coming, and Father Collar. He has not visited us since Jan's death." Their fears proved justified when, 3 days later, Emma made another of her mathematical announcements. She was helping her mother prepare dinner when she suddenly stopped peeling potatoes and looked up with that familiar calculating expression. "Mrs. Weber will be discovered tomorrow at 11 in the morning. Her husband will find her with Mr. Kellner in the brewery office. There will be violence." Greta dropped her paring knife. "Emma Nain, you must not say such things." But Emma continued with the same mathematical certainty she applied to her arithmetic lessons. "Mrs. Weber has been arriving at the brewery 7 minutes earlier each week for 6 weeks. Mr. Kellner has been staying 33 minutes later each day. Tomorrow, Mr. Weber will return from his delivery route 47 minutes early, because his horse is developing lameness in her left front leg. I have observed her gait deteriorating for 11 days. The convergence of these 3 variables makes discovery inevitable." Heinrich, who had been listening from the doorway, felt his chest tighten with dread. His daughter was not just observing their neighbors. She was predicting their futures with terrifying accuracy. "Emma, how do you know about Mr. Weber's horse?" he asked. "I count her steps when she passes our house. On March 1st, she favored her right legs 53% of the time. Today, it was 68%. Tomorrow, the lameness will be severe enough to slow the delivery route by 47 minutes. causing Mr. Weber to return early. The next day unfolded exactly as Emma had calculated. Wilhelm Fieber discovered his wife Anna in a compromising position with brewery owner Ernst Kellner. The confrontation that followed left Kellner with a broken nose and 3 cracked ribs, while Anna was beaten so severely that Dr. Mueller had to be summoned. The scandal rocked the tight-knit German community. But what disturbed people even more was the growing realization that little Emma Richter had somehow predicted the entire sequence of events. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. The pale girl with the mathematical mind had not only predicted Johann Dietrich's death, but had also foreseen the Weber-Kellner scandal with unsettling precision. People began to whisper about the strange child who sat at her window, watching and calculating and somehow knowing things that no child should know. The Richter family found themselves increasingly isolated. Former friends avoided them at church. Children were forbidden from playing near their house, and even the shopkeepers in the German quarter began to treat them with barely concealed suspicion. Hinrich's position at the brewery became tenuous. His fellow workers viewed him with unease, and Ernst Kellner, still recovering from his beating, made it clear that the Richter family was no longer welcome at company social events. But Emma seemed oblivious to the growing hostility around her. She continued her daily observations, her mathematical mind processing data and calculating probabilities with mechanical precision. She began keeping a leather journal, filling its pages with numbers, dates, and observations that her parents dared not read. The sight of their 11-year-old daughter bent over her calculations, writing in neat columns of figures, filled them with a dread they could not name. As winter gave way to spring, the isolation deepened. The German quarter that had once felt like home now seemed hostile and threatening. Hinrich began to consider the unthinkable, leaving Milwaukee, abandoning the life they had built, and starting over somewhere far from the whispers and the fear and the terrible accuracy of their daughter's predictions. But Emma was not finished with her calculations. The worst was yet to come, and her mathematical mind had already begun processing the data that would lead to the darkest secrets of all. As April arrived in Milwaukee, bringing with it the first tentative warmth after the brutal winter, Emma's journal grew thicker with her precise notations. The leather-bound book had become her constant companion, and she filled its pages with increasingly complex calculations that went far beyond simple mathematics. Her parents caught glimpses of charts tracking human behavior patterns, tables of numerical sequences they couldn't understand, and detailed maps of the German quarter marked with symbols and measurements. The community's fear of Emma had begun to manifest in more concrete ways. Children were forbidden from walking past the Richter house. Shopkeepers served the family quickly and without conversation, and even Father Kohler had begun limiting his interactions with them to formal church services. But Emma's isolation only seemed to sharpen her observational skills, as if the removal of normal social distractions allowed her unusual mind to focus more intently on the mathematical patterns she perceived in human behavior. Dr. Friedrich Müller, the community's physician, had grown increasingly curious about Emma's abilities. Unlike the superstitious whispers of the neighbors, Dr. Müller approached the situation with scientific interest. He had studied medicine in Berlin before immigrating to America, and had encountered cases of unusual mental capabilities in his practice. When Heinrich Richter approached him privately, seeking medical advice about his daughter's condition, Dr. Müller agreed to examine Emma. The examination took place on a rainy Thursday morning in Dr. Müller's office above the pharmacy on Water Street. Emma submitted to the doctor's questions and tests with the same mathematical precision she applied to everything else, answering each inquiry with meticulous accuracy, while her gray eyes remained fixed on some invisible calculation. "Emma," Dr. Müller began in his accented English, "your father tells me you can predict when certain events will happen. Can you explain to me how you do this?" Emma looked at the doctor with that unsettling, unwavering intensity. "I observe patterns and calculate probabilities based on established behavioral data. People believe their actions are random, but they follow mathematical sequences. When I have sufficient data points, I can predict future behavior with high accuracy." Dr. Müller leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. Can you give me an example? Emma opened her journal, flipping through pages filled with neat columns of numbers. Mrs. Brennan believes she is keeping a secret, but her pattern is quite obvious. Every Tuesday and Friday for 8 weeks, she has walked to the church at exactly 3:15 in the afternoon. But instead of entering for prayer, she continues to the rectory and remains there for precisely 43 minutes. Father Keller's pattern has also changed. He has been purchasing extra candles and wine, and his evening prayers have extended by an average of 17 minutes on those same days. The correlation is statistically significant. Dr. Meller felt his breath catch. The implications of what Emma was suggesting about the priest and the widow were scandalous enough. But the methodical way she had documented her observations was even more unsettling. Emma, how long have you been watching people in this way? Always, Emma replied simply, since I was very small. But I only began making calculations when I learned mathematics. The patterns became clearer then. After the examination, Dr. Miller spoke privately with Hinrich and Greta Richter. His medical training told him that Emma's condition was neurological rather than supernatural. But he had no framework for fully understanding what he had observed. Your daughter's mind works differently than other children's, he explained carefully. She processes information in ways that seem almost mechanical. In my opinion, this is a medical condition, not the other things people are saying. But even Dr. Muller's scientific perspective couldn't ease the growing dread surrounding Emma's predictions. 2 days later, she made another of her calculated announcements. There will be a fire at the Zimmerman house on Sunday evening, she stated calmly. It will start at 8:47 and spread to 3 adjacent buildings before the volunteer fire brigade can respond. Mr. Zimmerman will not survive. Hinrich felt that familiar chill grip his chest. Emma, you must not say such things. How could you possibly know about a fire? Emma consulted her journal without hesitation. Mr. Zimmerman has been drinking lamp oil mixed with whiskey for 12 days. I observed him purchasing both items in quantities that exceed normal household use. His wife left for Chicago to visit her sister yesterday, which fits the pattern of wives leaving before significant domestic incidents occur. The chimney on their house has structural damage that I calculated based on the angle of smoke emission and the pattern of soot deposits. The probability of fire is 93%. Greta began to weep softly. The clinical way Emma discussed potential tragedy, as if human suffering were just another mathematical problem, frightened her more than any talk of curses or witchcraft. This was her child, but she no longer recognized the cold precision in Emma's voice or the mechanical way she processed human pain. Hinrich made a decision he would regret for the rest of his life. He decided to warn Franz Zimmerman about Emma's prediction, hoping that preventive action might save a life and perhaps show that his daughter's abilities could be used for good, rather than simply predicting disaster. He found Zimmerman at the brewery on Saturday evening, stumbling drunkenly, reeking of the lamp oil Emma had mentioned. His warning was met with belligerent laughter and crude jokes about the devil child who thinks she knows everything. But something in Hinrich's desperation must have reached Zimmerman through the alcoholic haze, because the man promised to be careful with the lamps. Sunday evening came with unseasonable warmth and a dry wind from the west. At exactly 8:47, flames erupted from the Zimmerman house. The fire spread with terrifying speed, consuming not just the original structure, but 3 neighboring homes before the volunteer fire brigade could respond. Franz Zimmerman's body was found in the kitchen, where he had apparently fallen while trying to extinguish flames that had already grown uncontrollable. The precision of Emma's prediction, down to the exact minute, sent shockwaves through the German quarter. Hinrich's warning to Zimmerman had been overheard by several brewery workers, and word spread rapidly that Emma had foreseen not only the fire, but its timing and its deadly consequences. The community's unease hardened into open fear, and the Richter family found themselves completely ostracized. For Emma, however, the fire was simply another data point. She recorded the correlation between her prediction and the actual event, adjusted her calculations for minor variables, and moved on to processing new patterns, with the same detached precision that had made her prediction possible. In the first place, the days following the Zimmerman fire transformed the German quarter into a landscape of whispered fears and sideways glances. Emma's prediction had been too specific, too accurate to be dismissed as coincidence. 3 families, the Brons, the Colas, and the Steiners, had lost their homes in the blaze, and the neighborhood was struggling to shelter them, while grappling with the grim reality of Emma's mathematical foresight. Hinrich's position at the brewery became impossible. His co-workers avoided him. Conversations died when he entered a room. Ernst Kellner, still bearing the marks of Wilhelm Weber's attack, made it clear that the Richter family was unwelcome at any brewery functions. Emma's uncanny precision had turned her from a strange curiosity into something the community feared to name. She remained seemingly untouched by this growing hostility. She continued her daily observations, filling her leather-bound journal with increasingly complex calculations. She had begun constructing probability matrices, tracking multiple variables simultaneously, projecting predictions weeks into the future. Greta found herself terrified of the journal. She dreaded discovering what Emma might be calculating about their neighbors, or worse, about their own family. The child who had once been her greatest joy had become a source of quiet, relentless anxiety. Emma's matter-of-fact discussions of tragedy, her clinical assessments of human suffering, and her mechanical way of processing information that should have evoked empathy left Greta feeling that something fundamental had been stripped away from her daughter's humanity. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in late April. Emma sat at her usual place by the kitchen window, watching the street with her characteristic unnerving focus. Suddenly she looked up at her mother with those calculating gray eyes. "Mama, there is something wrong with the pattern today." Greta, who was kneading bread for baking, felt her hands begin to tremble. "What do you mean, Emma?" Emma flipped through the pages of her journal with practiced precision. "Every Tuesday for 11 weeks, Mrs. Brennan has walked to the rectory at exactly 3:15. But today, she left her house at 2:47 and walked toward the river instead. Her behavior indicates significant distress. Her step length decreased by 12%, and her breathing pattern was irregular. This suggests she is planning something final." The clinical way Emma discussed Mrs. Brennan's apparent suicidal intentions filled Greta with horror. "Emma, you must not speak of such things. Mrs. Brennan is a good woman. She would never— The mathematical probability is 87%. Emma interrupted with the same tone she might use to state the weather. "People who dramatically alter established behavioral patterns while displaying physical signs of distress typically execute irreversible decisions within 4 hours of the pattern change. Mrs. Brennan's pattern changed 43 minutes. Go." Greta felt the world tilting around her. The realization that her 11-year-old daughter was calmly predicting a neighbor's suicide with mathematical precision was more than she could bear. She dropped her bread dough and ran to find Hinrich, who was working in their small garden behind the house, trying to find some fragile sense of normalcy in the simple act of preparing the soil for spring planting. "Hinrich," she gasped, "you must come quickly." Emma's words struck Greta like a physical blow. "Emma says Mrs. Brennan is going to harm herself. We must do something," she whispered, her voice trembling. Hinrich looked at his wife's terrified face and felt that familiar, cold dread that had become their constant companion. They rushed back into the house to find Emma still sitting by the window, calmly making additional notations in her leather-bound journal, as though she were recording a scientific observation rather than predicting a neighbor's death. "Emma," Hinrich said sharply, "tell me exactly what you observed about Mrs. Brennan." Emma looked up from her neat rows of figures with that eerie composure. She deviated from her established Tuesday pattern by 28 minutes. Her physical indicators suggested severe emotional distress. Based on historical data about behavioral pattern disruption, the probability of self-harm is 87%, with peak likelihood occurring between 5 and 7 this evening. Hinrich didn't hesitate. The decision he made in that moment revealed both his desperation and his growing, reluctant acceptance of Emma's unsettling abilities. He grabbed his coat and left the house at once, following the route toward the river that Emma had indicated. He found Margaret Brennan standing on the dock where the fishing boats tied up, her hands clutching the wooden rail, staring into the dark water with an expression of despair so deep it chilled him. "Mrs. Brennan," he called softly, careful not to startle her. "Are you all right?" The elderly widow turned toward him, her eyes swollen and red with tears. "Heinrich," she whispered hoarsely, "what are you doing here?" I was concerned about you," he replied carefully. "You seem troubled lately." Mrs. Brennan's face crumpled as the dam of her composure broke. "I cannot bear it anymore, Heinrich. The shame, the whispers, the knowledge that everyone knows about my weakness. Father Collar says it is sin, but I cannot help what I feel for him. Better to end it than to live with this disgrace." Heinrich's stomach tightened. Emma's observations about Mrs. Brennan and Father Collar had been right all along. The woman truly intended to throw herself into the river rather than face the scandal. He spent the next 2 hours standing on the damp dock, speaking to her in a low, steady voice, convincing her that shame was not worth dying for. He reminded her that whispers faded, that people eventually forgot, and that a single scandal should not end a life. Gradually, Mrs. Brennan's sobbing quieted. She let him take her arm, and together they walked away from the water. When Heinrich returned home that evening, exhausted and shaken, he found Emma at the table, calmly making final notations in her journal. Mrs. Brennan did not follow through with her plan, she stated clinically, without a trace of emotion. The intervention changed the probability calculation. "I will need to adjust my variables for future predictions involving third-party interference." Heinrich stared at his daughter in disbelief. Emma had not only observed and calculated a suicide attempt before it happened, but now was treating his desperate intervention as nothing more than another data point to refine her mathematical model. That night, as Emma slept peacefully in her narrow bed, Heinrich and Greta made the most difficult decision of their lives. They could not stay in Milwaukee any longer. Emma's abilities, whatever they were, had made their life in the German quarter unbearable. But more frightening still was the realization that their daughter was not merely observing and calculating human behavior. She seemed to be detaching from the emotions that accompanied human tragedy. In whispers, they began to plan their departure. They would leave Wisconsin quietly, find another town where Emma's strange mind might be hidden or guided elsewhere, away from the fearful eyes of neighbors. But Emma was not finished with her calculations. The most disturbing revelations were still waiting to be uncovered. As Heinrich lay awake that night, listening to the soft creaks of their wooden house and the distant hush of the German quarter settling into uneasy sleep, a single, terrifying thought took hold. Emma's mind had reached far beyond idle observations. Her precision, her detachment, her ever-expanding calculations suggested she had uncovered secrets that went far deeper than adultery and suicide attempts. And worst of all, she was still calculating. The revelation came on the first day of May 1873, under a clear morning sky. Emma had been spending hours each day with her journal, creating increasingly complex charts that mapped the movements and behaviors of nearly every adult in their community. Meanwhile, Heinrich and Greta were quietly packing their belongings, determined to leave before another of Emma's predictions tore apart more lives. That morning, sunlight streamed through their kitchen window, catching the pale shimmer of Emma's hair as she looked up from her journal. "Papa," she said, her gray eyes as sharp as polished steel, "I need to show you something important. My calculations have revealed a pattern that explains everything." Heinrich froze. He had been dreading this moment for weeks. Reluctantly, he sat down across from his daughter. Emma opened her journal to a section unlike any he had seen before. Detailed charts, layered maps, pages upon pages of numerical sequences that looked more like the work of an investigator than that of an 11-year-old child. For 26 months, Emma began with her characteristic, icy precision. "I have been observing and recording the behavioral patterns of 43 adults in our community. At first, I believed the patterns were random variations, but when I analyzed the data systematically, I discovered correlations indicating organized criminal activity." Heinrich felt his blood run cold. "Emma, what are you saying?" She turned a page with calm hands, her voice steady as she recited numbers and names. 7 men in our community have been meeting secretly every Wednesday at midnight in the basement of Kellner's Brewery. I calculated their movement patterns based on observed deviations from their normal behavior, timing inconsistencies in their stated activities, and physical evidence of their gatherings. She pointed to the map. Mr. Steinberg tells his wife he works late on Wednesday nights, but he leaves the mill at exactly the same time as the other 6 men and walks to the brewery using a route that avoids the main streets. The pattern has been consistent for 26 months, with only 3 exceptions, all due to illness or family emergencies. Hinrich stared at the page, recognizing the names Emma had marked: Wilhelm Weber, Franz Kellner, Ernst's brother Hans Zimmermann, Franz's cousin Otto Steinberg, Klaus Brennan, Margaret's deceased husband until 3 months ago, Gustav Wolf and Hermann Kruger. Emma, he whispered, how could you possibly know about secret meetings? I observe everything, Papa, she said simply. Every night, every movement, every deviation from established patterns. Emma turned to another page thick with calculations. But the meetings are not the most significant discovery. My calculations indicate these 7 men have been involved in systematic theft from the brewery, with estimated losses of approximately $47,000 over 26 months. Heinrich's hands began to tremble. The amount was staggering, more than most families in the German quarter would see in a lifetime. How could you calculate such a thing? Emma's explanation came with her usual detached clarity. I noticed discrepancies between the reported beer production figures and the actual output I calculated based on observed deliveries, ingredient purchases, and waste disposal patterns. The difference indicated systematic theft. Then I identified the perpetrators by tracking their behavioral anomalies. She pointed to another set of charts, each line of figures an accusation. These individuals all showed consistent patterns of increased spending that did not align with their reported incomes. Mr. Weber purchased new furniture worth approximately $300. Mr. Steinberg sent money to relatives in Germany. I observed him at the post office 12 times with packages too large for normal correspondence. This pattern was consistent across all 7 men. Hinrich realized with a cold, sinking feeling that he was staring at the evidence of a criminal conspiracy uncovered by his own child. Through observation, deduction, and mathematics alone. But Emma was not done. The theft operation required inside knowledge of brewery security and access to the financial records. She continued, her voice steady. My calculations pointed to Ernst Kellner himself as the organizer of the theft ring. The final piece of Emma's revelation struck Hinrich like a hammer. Ernst Kellner, the brewery owner, the man who had gradually turned the community against the Richter family, was, according to Emma's calculations, the mastermind of a massive theft operation involving 7 men. The precision of Emma's data, the certainty in her tone, and the meticulous evidence laid out across those pages left no room for easy denial. Emma had not just observed a crime. She had mapped it, measured it, and proven it. And in doing so, she had uncovered something far darker than anyone in Milwaukee's German quarter had ever suspected. Emma, these are grave accusations. Are you absolutely sure of your calculations? Emma flipped open her journal and reviewed her numbers one last time. The mathematical probability stands at 96%. But Papa, there's something else. Something that clarifies why Mr. Kellner has been working so hard to distance our family from everyone else. Heinrich felt his chest tighten with a suffocating sense of dread. What do you mean by that? Emma met his gaze with eerie calm. Mr. Kellner knows that I observe everything. He has been observing me as I watch him. 3 weeks ago, he came to our house twice after dark, standing outside for exactly 17 minutes each time, as if deciding whether I'd discovered his secret. His behavior strongly suggests that he suspects my knowledge of the theft operation. The chilling reality hit Heinrich with devastating clarity. Emma's mathematical insight hadn't just uncovered a conspiracy, it had painted a target on their family. The men she had exposed would not allow such dangerous knowledge to remain unchallenged. Emma shut her journal with a soft but deliberate sound, fixing her father with those unblinking, steel-gray eyes. Papa, my calculations indicate we are in grave danger. Mr. Kellner and his accomplices cannot afford for me to keep observing. There's an 84% chance they will act against us, most likely within the next 72 hours. Heinrich understood at once that this was no longer about theft, infidelity, or petty scandal. Emma had predicted danger to their very lives. Her numbers were cold and precise, but they rang like a death knell. That evening he acted without hesitation. Carrying Emma's journal and its damning evidence, he approached Dr. Muller under cover of night. The physician, long unsettled by Emma's uncanny abilities, examined the journal by lamplight and whispered with a mixture of awe and horror, "Heinrich, if Emma's calculations are correct, we're looking at the largest theft operation Milwaukee has ever seen. But more urgently, if Kellner suspects she knows, your family is in mortal peril." Dr. Muller promised to help. Using his professional contacts, he arranged for Heinrich to receive an immediate job offer at a distant brewery in Minnesota. It would serve as their cover for an urgent departure. They would flee that very night, before Emma's grim 72-hour countdown could run out. As the Richter family quietly loaded their few belongings into Dr. Muller's wagon, the night thick around them, Emma spoke one last time, her tone as measured as ever. "Papa, in roughly 6 months the theft will be discovered through other means. Mr. Kellner will face punishment. But 3 of the 7 men will not survive the investigation. The numbers are clear." Heinrich shuddered as he lifted her into the wagon. Even while they fled, his daughter was calculating the future consequences of the plot she'd uncovered. And as always, her prediction would prove flawless. By winter, federal agents would expose Kellner's embezzlement. He would be arrested and convicted. 3 of his co-conspirators would meet grim ends that would remain shrouded in mystery. But on that dark May night in 1873, as the wagon creaked through the sleeping streets of Milwaukee's German Quarter, Heinrich's mind was consumed by a single thought. His daughter's extraordinary gift had saved their lives and stripped them of the only home they had ever known in America. In the early hours of May 2, 1873, the Richter family vanished from Milwaukee, leaving behind only rumors and unanswered questions. Dr. Muller told curious neighbors they had been summoned back to Bavaria. Those who bothered to check found no ship records of their departure. The truth was stranger still. Heinrich, Greta, and Emma had traveled to Minnesota, where he found work at a small brewery in New Ulm. Dr. Muller swore to protect their secret, fully aware that Emma's abilities made her dangerous to powerful men. In their new home, the Richters tried to rebuild a quiet life. Heinrich settled into the familiar rhythm of brewery work, and Greta slowly restored a sense of domestic normalcy. But Emma remained unchanged. Her calculating mind continued to map, observe, and predict human behavior with mechanical precision. For several months, Dr. Muller received letters from the family. Emma had begun working with a mathematics professor at a nearby college, a fellow German immigrant named Dr. Hermann Weiss, who sought to study her ability from a scientific perspective rather than through superstition or fear. He encouraged Emma to channel her observational skills into structured research. Then, in November of 1873, Dr. Muller received a letter from Heinrich containing Emma's final prediction regarding the theft. Her calculations had been exact. Federal investigators uncovered Kellner's scheme, and the brewery owner was convicted of embezzling over $50,000. Wilhelm Fieber, Kellner's closest ally, was found dead in his home under suspicious circumstances that were officially labeled suicide. Otto Steinberg perished soon after in what was called a drunken accident, and Hermann Kruger died of a sudden heart attack that bore unsettling similarities to certain known poisons. Emma's foresight, calculated from hundreds of miles away, proved chillingly accurate in every respect. The German Quarter eventually recovered, but the theft and its aftermath left scars. The federal investigation revealed layers of corruption that had long been quietly rotting the community from within. New families moved in, businesses slowly rebuilt, and the neighborhood settled into its new shape. Yet the legend of Emma Richter, the pale girl with gray eyes who could predict death and unravel secrets through numbers, became embedded in local folklore. Parents invoked her as a cautionary tale, warning children about the dangers of knowing too much. Adults whispered about the secrets she might have uncovered had she stayed. Even Father Koller, who had once praised her abilities as divine, later admitted to Dr. Muller that her power had shaken his faith. "Knowledge that's sharp," he said, might not be meant for human minds. As the story spread, its aura of dread grew. Listeners were left with chills, imagining the silent, calculating girl who had forced truth to the surface with nothing but observation and mathematics. Dr. Mueller's last letter to the family was written in the spring of 4. He reported that the neighborhood had settled, though Emma's story lingered in whispers. But he added a troubling detail. Federal investigators had been deeply unsettled by Emma's journal, which contained calculations and behavioral analyses far more extensive than the brewery conspiracy alone. She had been studying entire neighborhoods, charting events that hadn't yet happened. Her mind, they admitted, functioned like a machine built to predict human lives. The precision of your daughter's mind would make even trained investigators envious, Mueller wrote. But I am grateful she is far from here. Knowledge like hers is dangerous to everyone. The final known reference to Emma Richter appears in the New Ulm College Mathematics Department records of the recent setting Professor. Hermann Weiss noted that his special student possessed unparalleled talent in statistical analysis and behavioral prediction. But not long after, the family relocated once again. The record ends there. Her story, part fact, part legend, remains one of the most haunting mysteries whispered through Milwaukee's German Quarter. After that final note, Emma Richter vanished from the historical record as completely as she had disappeared from Milwaukee on that shadowed night in May of 1873. What became of the girl who could calculate human behavior with uncanny mathematical precision remains a mystery that has never been solved. Some researchers have speculated that families like the Richters, whose children possessed extraordinary cognitive abilities, deliberately erased themselves from public view, shielding their loved ones from both scientific exploitation and the dangerous curiosity of fearful communities. Emma's story endures as one of the few documented cases where such abilities were recorded in detail, sufficient to grasp both their magnitude and their chilling implications. Her life is a stark reminder that the human mind itself remains one of our greatest enigmas, capable of producing extraordinary abilities that challenge what we think we know about intelligence, observation, and prediction. In 1873, Emma Richter's precise mathematical analysis of human behavior was labeled either divine or demonic. But modern science understands more. Conditions such as savant syndrome, autism spectrum disorders, or certain neurological anomalies can create minds that process information at a level that once seemed otherworldly. What do you think of this story? Was everything truly revealed? Or did Emma's abilities stretch even further than what history recorded? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever known someone with extraordinary mental gifts that defy easy explanation? If this tale sent chills down your spine, subscribe for more stories that explore history's darkest and most fascinating mysteries. Hit the notification bell and share it with someone who loves unsettling, thought-provoking tales. Cases like Emma Richter's remind us that the most frightening truths are not always buried in the supernatural. Sometimes they are hidden in plain sight, waiting for a mind sharp enough to calculate and expose them. The legacy of Emma Richter stands as a testament to this unsettling reality. It reveals that true terror can emerge not from ghosts or curses, but from the cold, relentless application of mathematical logic to the secrets of human behavior. In a world where we comfort ourselves with the illusion of privacy, the existence of minds capable of seeing and decoding hidden patterns should give us pause. The secrets we believe are safely concealed may already be visible to those who know where to look and how to count.